Hello and welcome to the Cook Memorial Public Library Podcast. I'm your host, Nate Goss. Today on the podcast, we bring you another local history segment we are calling Libertyville Celebrity Spotting. So Jenny Berry is back to talk about some of the big names, the A-listers, the stars that have historically graced Libertyville with their presence. We've actually got so many names that we're going to split this into a two-part episode. So this is actually just part one of two. I think you're really going to enjoy this little celebrity tour we've put together. So let's head on over. This is my conversation with Jenny Berry. Welcome back to the podcast. This time we are talking celebrities that have visited Libertyville,
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah, thanks for having me back. So recently they're on Facebook. I've seen some posts from Main Street, Libertyville, where famous people, again, depending on how you determine famous, have been
famous
in
to Libertyville, I guess.
Yeah. So recently Vince Vaughn was caught in downtown Libertyville. People might know him as an actor who graduated from Lake Forest High School, known for movies such as Swingers and Dodgeball and Wedding Crashers.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Another person who was recently posted, who's famous to me because I'm a great fan of the Great British Baking Show, is Jürgen Kross, who was one of the leading contenders on a previous season. So,
okay.
Because over the years, as I come across newspaper articles, and frequent listeners of the podcast will know that a lot of the things we just come across them and then file them for later. So when I would see articles about people of national stature visiting Libertyville, I would grab them and put them in a file. And it just seemed like with the recent celebrity sightings that maybe it was time to talk about other celebrity sightings of the past.
Yeah, who knows? Maybe someday we'll have there'll be a Libertyville celebrity bus tour or something like that. But.
Possibly.
Okay, well, so there were actually quite a few that you had brought to me to sit that we could talk about. So we actually decided to break this up into two parts. So this is part one of two, and who knows, maybe there'll be a 3 and 4 as things add on. But right now we're kind of looking at 1845 up until 1942. You've got 3 people we're going to talk about that made little appearances here at Libertyville that I think are just fascinating. So let's start with the first one. Sure.
So the earliest one is 1845, and we're going to talk about a woman named Sojourner Truth. So today there's a Ivanhoe Congregational Church over in Ivanhoe, just west of Mundelein. It was founded in 1838 and first met in members' homes, but in 1845 they built their church in Libertyville on the land that's now occupied by the American Legion building, so just north of the Liberty Theater on Milwaukee Avenue. They were only in that building for a short time, and they didn't grow as expected, and they couldn't afford to keep the building, so they moved on from there. But before they moved out, and this is from the earliest history of the church by Mrs. E.J. Brainerd, which was written on the 50th anniversary. So the 50th anniversary of the church was 1888.
Wow, okay.
Yeah. Now, this congregation and Congregationalists in general were decidedly abolitionists, so anti-slavery. And they held a convention at the church in 1845. Mr. Ichabod Cotting, who was an abolition politician and clergyman from Wisconsin, traveled around and spoke about slavery. He came and spoke at the convention, and then it said, quote, a choir of singers came from Chicago singing anti-slavery songs. So this sounded kind of like a big event.
Yeah.
It also went on to say in this history that Sojourner Truth, a colored woman, also spoke at this convention. So some of our podcast listeners may be familiar with Sojourner Truth. She was a former enslaved person who escaped to freedom in 1826 and then went on to be very big in the anti-slavery abolitionist movement.
Yeah, which makes sense. I mean, I think what she was most known for was doing like kind of a speaking circuit, like going and talking, her big speech being the Ain't I a Woman speech that became pretty famous.
Right. So that's all we know about the visit. I mean, just the mention of it kind of makes your eyes pop when you see it.
That's very cool that Sojourner Truth came to Libertyville, and it seems to actually do what she's known for, which is to speak on anti-slavery and women's rights.
Exactly.
Yeah, very cool.
Yeah.
So when she came, she was speaking in the older church building, not the one that's there now.
Correct.
Right.
So she was
the one that was in the old American Legion Hall.
Right. So there was a building that the Congregational Church built in 1845 on the land that the American Legion building is on now.
It's not the actual building.
No.
Okay.
The building that's there today was built in 1894.
Got it.
It's a second building on that
property.
Property.
So that clarifies things. But yeah, so you could go to where that building is and kind of stand in the same area Sojourner Truth once stood.
But if you go inside, you're not going to see any reference to Sojourner Truth. It's a different building.
But you heard it here at the library. Yeah. Okay, very cool. All right, well, how about our next celebrity sighting in Libertyville?
Sure. So I don't remember if we've talked about these people before or not. They're kind of some of my favorite visitors to Libertyville. there were two, what we call today, little people, named Commodore Foote and the Fairy Queen. So think Tom Thumb, basically. This was a brother and sister whose real names were Charles and Eliza Nestel, and they traveled around and made appearances. They appeared at Lake County Fair one time, and they had toured Europe. They'd also met Mrs. Lincoln and President Lincoln at the White House in 1864. They had been in front of Queen Victoria, so they were fairly famous at the time.
Big names, yeah.
So the big thing is that they came almost every summer to Libertyville from their home in Fort Wayne, Indiana. And it may have been partially to do with sort of the medicinal waters that were available in Libertyville. So in the late 1800s, early 1900s, Libertyville had some clear springs, as well as some sulfur springs that ran underneath town. And there was a man named Frederick Grabby who was the first person to start bottling the clear water in the late 1800s. But Charles and Eliza would come and they would stay at the Kern Hotel. And if people are interested in learning more about the Kern Hotel, we had a recent Historical Society program on hotels, and it's available on the Historical Society's YouTube channel.
Great. Well, we'll link to it in the show
That'd
notes.
Be awesome.
Along with, I know we did do an episode about this whole spring water thing.
Yes, we did.
And Frederick Grabby. So we'll link to that as well if anyone wants to, kind of go down the rabbit hole of Libertyville spring water.
Which you definitely can.
Which it seems this was the attraction maybe for them.
Definitely, yeah. And it turned out that they became very good friends with the Kerns, who owned the Kern Hotel. And they were such close friends that they actually stayed in contact with them even after the Kerns turned over the hotel to new owners. And Charles Nestel came back to Libertyville in 1918 to attend Henry Kern's funeral. So it wasn't a one-time appearance in Libertyville. They were frequent visitors to the area.
They were regulars.
They were. And the last one I want to talk about in part one of Celebrity Visits
correct, yeah.
is James Cagney. Some people might refer to him as Jimmy Cagney. He was an actor in the 1930s and 1940s. He was known for his tough guy roles.
Yeah, he's like a gangster film guy.
A lot of
I remember seeing like Public Enemies and stuff like that.
Yeah. He actually won an Oscar for a role in a musical, though, Yankee Doodle Dandy, released in May of 1942. So when he visited Libertyville in September of 1942, he was one of the biggest stars around, basically, which seems like, why would he come to Libertyville, But he was actually on a tour to encourage people to buy war bonds during World War II.
Yeah.
And a lot of celebrities were involved in that. A lot of Hollywood actors were involved in that as well. And he had been brought to town through the efforts of Liberty Theater manager Robert Collier, who was also co-chair of bond sales for Lake County. The entire event that day was planned by the Lions Club, and it was held September 3rd, 1942.
So right in the middle of World War II.
Exactly, right, yeah. A big event in Cook Park. The Libertyville Band played songs from the movie Yankee Doodle Dandy, which were all World War I songs. They were out front of the Cook home, which that time was the library. The library was decorated with bunting. There were booths set up to buy bonds.
He was standing right in front of the library at the time.
Right.
Then.
I mean,
what is today's cookhouse? But yeah, the library.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, you think of today, that is like the gathering space, and it has really been for
the town square
for years. Yeah. And so, in addition to getting people to buy bonds, there were auctions, which the proceeds of the money would go to buying bonds. Local businesses gave up items for that, including a pig from a local farm, which actually sold for $20,500.
That's like a golden pig
Huge
or something.
Pig. It must have been a big pig. And then one of the other ones, which I thought was a good gift, was 4 gold passes to the Liberty Theater, which were good for free entrance to movies for a year.
Okay. Yeah, I would take that.
So overall at this event, where James Cagney actually helped with the auction and tried to stir up the crowd and get people to buy things, they sold $110,625 in bonds.
All right. Well, I guess he was pretty successful at, promoting people to buy them. Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, Libertyville actually got another award, I guess, as for selling all those bonds. They were selected as a location of the world premiere of the movie Desperate Journey, which was a movie starring Errol Flynn and then actor, later President Ronald Reagan.
Got it. And Errol Flynn would be he played like Robin Hood back in the day.
Right.
Like
he was
one of the first
big
Robin
action
Hoods.
hero, basically, of the day, right? Now, of course, the price of entry to the movie was the purchase of another war bond. So whether
There's
this
the
was
catch.
was this actually an award? I just thought about this the last time I read this. Was this actually a reward? Or was it Libertyville bought so many, we're going to get them to buy some more.
So get some more.
Yeah.
But you get to have this cool premiere.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And you get to buy some more bonds. So, I mean, world premiere sounds like, red carpet and celebrities.
Yeah.
And it really wasn't that. It was just kind of a first showing. Now, the governor of Illinois did show up, and he came up in a carriage. So, I mean, it was a big deal, but it wasn't like Ronald Reagan was here,
or Errol Flynn. Like, they didn't show up for this premiere.
No, not at all. Yeah.
But we did get James Cagney.
James Cagney came through town, and he was a busy guy. I mean, he came in for a little bit of time here, and he was off to like a midnight ball somewhere in Chicago, so he was on a schedule.
Yeah.
I mean, so those are the first three, just a little taste of the celebrities to come.
Yeah, we've got some more coming, and that gets us up basically up to about World War II, and then our next episode will kind of pick up from there and go up through the 70s. So, this is very fascinating to think about all, and it's interesting that we're distinguishing between people who are visiting here versus people who actually are from here, which we've done other episodes and blog posts about that as well.
Right. So we're not talking about the fact that Marlon Brando lived here for 3 years, or Tom Morello or Pippa Sue. All of them obviously come and visit their family.
Yes.
I'm talking more about those of national stature at the time that they visited.
Coming here, Libertyville as a destination for them.
Exactly.
Yeah, which is very interesting to think about. All right, well, that'll wrap up part 1 of the episode. So I just want to thank you once again for being on the podcast, Jenny.
You're welcome. I look forward to next time.
Okay, thanks for listening today. We'll be launching part 2 soon, so be on the lookout. Don't forget to also check out those show notes where you can get a little bit more information about some of the things we talked about today. So before we go, I just want to remind you that if you're interested in doing some of your own local history research, you might want to get a start on our website. We've got a local history page filled with all sorts of resources you can start digging into. That website is cooklib.org. You can also go and check out our local history blog posts on our blog, Shelf Life. There we also do things like book reviews, genealogy tips, and a whole lot more. That blog can be found at shelflife.cooklib.org. And we do welcome any feedback, any comments, any questions about the podcast. You can talk to us anytime. Give us a shout out on Twitter at Cook Library, and you can always reach out to us through email. Send those messages to webmaster@cooklib.org. And as always, if you've enjoyed this episode, you can always help us out the most by just telling others about it. And if you'd like to go above and beyond, you can even leave us a kind rating on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. This episode of the Cook Memorial Public Library podcast was recorded in Digital Studio 1 at the Cook Park Library in downtown Libertyville. Visit the Digital Studio page on the library's website to learn more about how you can use the studio spaces at either of our libraries. We will be back soon, but until then, keep reading, keep watching, and keep listening.